Melody Raglin, thank you very much for joining us, and I appreciate your willingness to share your dad's story, your story, and you were just mentioning that your dad wrote about his experience on the Lexington, and I'm looking at his some of the major engagements that he played a role in during the Second World War. If I remember correctly, your dad went in the Navy in 1938. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Um, do you know what his motivation was for going in the Navy? Of course, the Great Depression was still on at that time. Was it just a job, or do you have any idea what his motivation?
He was, a small community Iowa farm boy, and I guess he just wanted to see the world. He made it his lifelong career for sure. He was in 13 years when we lost him.
Yeah.
He was going for the career.
Yeah. So your dad went in the Navy in 1938, and then your dad went missing in November 1951. Is that right? November 6, 1951.
Yes.
Yeah. How old were you in 1951? In November 1951?
I was just about 14 months old.
Okay.
Our family went to Hawaii. I have two older sisters. One's 10 years older than me, and the other one's 5 years older than me. And all the families were being, relocated to Honolulu, Hawaii, because they were going to be going to Japan. So my family got there in May by ship with a whole bunch of other families. He left in July. I was born in August. And then, the following November, he went missing.
Okay.
So that's that time frame.
How old were you when this really began to settle in? Obviously, when you're that young, you don't know. But then as you add a couple years to your life, then you have a sense that maybe something's different in your world than it is in other people's world. But how old were you when you really kind of, had a sense of what had happened?
I'm going to say when you start, probably you become aware, probably kindergarten, first grade, that you're aware of more than your family and that surrounding area. And I think I started noticing then that I didn't have a dad, and dads were a very curious thing to me. I always had that growing up. Poor Melody, she'll never know her dad. So around 6 years older, I'm saying you're aware. And because it was so many years after him missing, this is 5-6 years, no one's talking about it anymore. You just hear little bits and pieces. My mom was always willing to talk about it with, friends and acquaintances, but, kids are always in the other room, not sitting at the adult table listening. So, you just hear things, I knew he went missing. He was missing, and I feel I was actually raised that he could come home. He could come back. I was raised with that feeling. He could come back. 5 years after World War II, weren't people coming out of the jungles of the Philippines and stuff, not knowing the war was over? And when you're missing, you just don't know. Like I said, I was raised like he was coming back. I always felt he could. When we were living in San Francisco. We moved out of San Francisco when I was 8, and I remember going to my mom crying, saying, "We can't move. How's he going to find us if we move?" Not knowing anything that, we're in Hawaii, oblivious to all that. Just how is he going to find us if we leave here? I don't remember her answer, really. But 2 years after we moved to the suburbs outside of San Francisco, one Christmas morning, there was a whole bunch of packages on our front door. And I kept thinking as an 8-year-old kid, my dad brought them. He's so disfigured from the war, he doesn't want us to see him. So I think for the rest of my, next 5, whatever amount of time, my bedroom faced the steps of the front door. And I was always looking out there every night before I went to bed, thinking and I might see him walk by or something like that. But I really believed for a long time it was him, But 5 years after that, we found out it was the neighbors across the street who did that because they realized we were, we had what we needed. Let's put it that way. We weren't destitute, but you have what you need, and that's good. And so I found out it was them, but as you see, it still feels strong. I thought he was disfigured.
Yeah.
You ask me a question now. Okay. I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always felt he could come back. He could. My mom never remarried. She says, I couldn't do that to him. What if he comes back?
Mm.
And she had very, 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 if nothing, information from, the military about what was going on. He went missing. She died in 1995 thinking he died. Why did the Russians shoot down a weather reconnaissance flight? She died at age 80 thinking, why did the Russians shoot down this plane? They were just, checking out the weather. She died thinking that. She never got the truth. And that's in 1995 when the DPMO or DPAA that they call it now finally formed and start offering answers to some people, the MIA group.
So, I mean, I'm very moved by what I'm hearing you say. When, this very powerful image of a little girl, checking the porch every night, thinking that maybe her dad is there, but he's disfigured, and but she's looking out for him and thinking we can't move because dad might come back and so on. Do you remember when it was when you, was there a certain point where you said, where you kind of determined that we're probably not going to see him in the flesh again, but we will continue the project to find out what happened? Or have you made that transition? Is there still a little part of you that says, maybe?
I think I've expressed to you how I'm trying to get this crew on the Korean War Memorial Wall. So I'm going to say about a month ago, I finally realized I resigned myself that I'm probably never going to find out what happened. So that's why getting this crew on the Korean War Memorial Wall is very important to me. So I'm going to say about a month ago,
really,
I had to let it go.
Do you remember what that moment?
But I don't think I've let it go. But I find.
I'm sorry, what was that? I missed that last part.
Oh, I says that I just did it a month ago. I resigned myself to say I'm not going to find out what happened. And I will find some sense of peace, I think, when I see their names on that wall.
So what you're talking about is you've got the Korean War Memorial there in Washington, D.C., and it's a short distance from the Vietnam Memorial, and these memorials are very different. The Vietnam Memorial is the Wall of Names, of course, and then the Korean War Memorial, you have the guys on patrol. But it sounds like there's a project to have the names as well of the Korean War vets.
Oh yes, this has been going in the works for quite a few years, and this year all the permits got approved. I have someone who's on that board who's been keeping me posted of the progress. That way, when the names came out like a couple of Fridays ago, I was ready with my petition letter to get these guys, because I'm very happy to say I have this friend in DC who's been keeping me posted on it and called me that morning to say the names aren't there. They're not there. So I was prepared and ready for this fight.
The fight being to get your dad's
And I
name
have
on the
to
wall.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
the crew, I speak for all of them.
To get the name of the crew, and I think there are 10 on the plane altogether. Is that right?
Yes,
10
yes,
on the plane.
yes.
No, your dad was apparently the plane is shot down. The plane is out on a reconnaissance mission near Vladivostok, Russia. The report is that the plane was shot down. Do you know, is that certain that it was shot down?
It's what the Russians said, that two LA fighters got up there and shot the plane and it crashed at sea. They said we were in the Sea of Japan. They said we were over their boundaries. However, that's what the Russians always say, the plane crashed at sea. That's their MO. And I have, again, dealing with this for 25 years, you get contacts and sources in Washington, D.C. that fill in some of the puzzle pieces that are out there. So I've never believed that this plane crashed in the Sea of Japan. And they had the top-notch radar equipment on these flights. Their goal was always to get these planes to land, to get the equipment and the pilots. That's been, information that I have learned over investigating all these years.
You're saying the Russians would have knowing what kind of plane it is, of course they're going to know what kind of plane it is. They would have an interest in getting the plane and getting the crew of the plane because it's an intelligence gathering plane, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
It's an intelligence gathering plane. Do you know, has a search been done in the Sea of Japan to try to locate the plane, to try to confirm what the Russians say?
There were search parties sent out. I had an article done on me, I don't know, about 8 years ago with the Sacramento Bee's veteran story about this particular case. And I always put my phone number out there. Well, I did get because there's reports that ships were sent, to search for this plane, but because of the top secret mission of this plane, they always had 2 flight plans. Because of the top mission, they weren't going to even send the ships in the right neighborhood because they don't want to give up the top secret information. Some pilots did fly over some of the area that supposedly they had their last transmission communication, and a couple of them did on the phone after that newspaper article about 8 years ago. And they said we did search for them because there was that question, did they really or did they not really? So this pilot, 2 of them said, we searched for your dad's plane. We searched for it. So we don't know. There was another Russian citizen that came forth in 1994, which elaborates his story even more. He was in the hospital from outside of Vladivostok, and he had an injury from parachuting out of a plane, and the hospital was so crowded. He was in the hallway, and across from him was 4 Americans. This guy's testimony, I have it in Russian, English, I have it on tape. And he just opened up the possibilities and unanswered questions that are out there. He said there was 4 Americans in the hospital, and 1 was buried at a local cemetery. One of them just had a broken arm, and he's the man that would, they would talk to each other, and the man would say, San Francisco, Chicago. He named 4 cities, and all those 4 cities were where our guys were from. One was in the hospital. He was in pretty bad shape that the nurses would go and turn him and the staff. Another one was pretty bad, but there was 2 that weren't bad and 2 that were pretty bad. So this man, Vladimir Trotsenko, is a beautiful man to have come forth and share this story. And
now, were you able to speak with him personally?
No. But the fella who worked with our case for a good 23 years missed the mark, and I can find myself upset about that because even a bad investigator would go investigate something twice. He put his information, for him to come forth in Russia, they're still kind of a closed society in 1994. For him to come forth was very heroic of him. And I even have the video of him in his house with his wife while he's being interviewed. He was the expert on Cold War cases, or this case. Visited him. They even went to the hospital where they were all stayed and reviewed the records and interviewed some people who were staff at that time. So I have all those interviews too.
these are interviews done by an American official.
DPAA, yeah, DPAA, which that's, you know that, right? It used to be called DPMO, just changed.
Right, yeah.
So he never went back to investigate him, kind of poo-potted, the dates were wrong. He was really there in March, but the gentleman, Trotsenko, said he was there when the grapes are ripe. I don't know about you, but I equate food with situations. So if he said the grapes are ripe, that's fall. That's right there in November. So they poo-pawed the story, did not go and reinvestigate, did not go ask questions. He was an older gent. The man died, and when they finally went back, his son said, I don't know anything about that. So we missed a huge opportunity to really, get to, the hospital. And then he went to the cemetery and pointed out where this the other American was buried. Well, they did get permission to dig a few years after that and found out they dug in the wrong place. So for 25 years now, we've been trying to do a redig. 25 years now. Now we're trying to get permission for the dig, and they always tell you, our situation with Russia. And I say, I don't buy that anymore. We always got a situation with Russia. There's some windows there, and we have people there, but they're not doing it. Well, so we're still playing with going back to the cemetery and dig. 3 years ago, they roped it off. We were supposed to get permission. I heard from my sources of people in Russia, they're waiting. Why haven't we submitted our permission slip? Why haven't we done that? So I get on the horn and start squawking and making noise. And then all of a sudden we're in a climate with Russia again. We've had, so you can sense my frustration.
So, I mean, it sounds like in addition to your dad going missing, and not only your dad going missing, but the lack of definite knowledge about pretty much anything related to that, other than we know that the plane took off on November 6, 1951 and never came back. Aside from that, there's a lack of definite knowledge. So there's that. But then it sounds like there's also the frustration that the home team maybe isn't as committed. Your perception that the home team's not so committed to the cause of finding out what happened.
We had one guy for 2 years, like I said, except for this one guy who's been with us for 23 years, who was the most dynamic one ever. What he did in 2 years was phenomenal. He had us at one of the DC meetings sit there at the table with the Russians who are on the same page dealing with POWs, MIAs. It was fantastic. We had the earphones with the Russian interpreters. We sat at the table. It was a wonderful thing. There's supposedly 10 Cold War cases. This fella who worked with us for 2 years, who was unbelievably dynamic, said, we're going to choose one Cold War case to get results. We need to focus on one. And we have had at one meeting, all 10 families there. We have 4 families who are persistently there, and 2 of us who are like always writing, always at it. Okay. Yeah. And he was amazing. And then 2 years, he's gone. And that whole idea of we're at the top of the list with the next people coming in, it's like, what? In the beginning, in 1992, 93, there was a group of family members and went to DC and wanted to know what happened to their family members and what are you going to do with it? These family members, I know 10 of them, and the other one's president of the organization. Somehow I ended up with this pretty dynamic group who has led the way, opened up the DPAA organization really into what it is, that families want answers. So still, these women are unbelievably dynamic to be at the beginning of this whole thing. So like I said, it takes years to know what questions you want, what's missing, and then when you finally get down to know what you need to ask and what direction, all of a sudden you give it to Navy casualty and then they give you these generic answers back. like one of them was, you know, I always thought at age 51 I'd find out what happened to my dad because it was 50 years of silence. I respect that military rule. I mean, it's just standard. Okay, so 50 years came, it got increased to 75 years. I think it's getting better, but somehow it always seems the same. There's the same vocal people, the same group that are fighting to get answers, and we're still slammed down. If they can't agree, we had prisoners in the Gulag system, and that we have information right here. Take the metro downtown in Washington, D.C. and get the information for me. It's a brick wall with this case.
In one of the documents that you sent me, you see, maybe it's here. It says, yeah, I'm looking at this. It says both the U.S. and Russian governments refuse to release secret classified information. Do you feel? I mean, what is your level of certainty that there is documentation related to your dad's case in an archive, either there in Russia, here in the States, or both?
Sometimes you get someone sympathetic, sometimes you don't. A classic example is, okay, we'll send you some, they're all blank. They've all been redacted. They've all been blanked out. The example of the other lady whose brother was on this plane, who was at the early 1993 meetings, she requested some documents. It came certified mail. She had to sign it. She opens it up. Every page is blank. Stuff like that.
You mean blacked out from the redaction?
Yes, redacted. There's one document that we have 4 pieces of paper, you know, November 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th of this, you know, of the shoot down, and the communication between several, you know, brass bigwigs. Some of it's very insulting that they're afraid to stir up Russia. We're not going to do a formal complaint. We're going to just mention it at the next meeting. I mean, that's just like unbelievable, but I guess soldiers are dispensable. And now I forgot where I was going with that. But that's okay.
Well, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Now your dad is, I mean, just looking at the, you know, what very little I know about this case, he's flying reconnaissance. I've read some of the citations, participated in combat control and reconnaissance flights over enemy territory in the face of great hazards. He's certainly in the area of operations, I would think, related to the Korean conflict, and of course he's shot down as the Korean conflict is going. So from a simple, you know, layman's point of view, it seems like this would be pretty clearly related to the Korean conflict, at least indirectly related to the Korean conflict, and therefore it would seem, you know, well, yeah, I mean, it seems like his name would go on the wall. Why isn't that the case as of now? Why is your dad not classified as, why is your dad's case not a case of becoming MIA? Why is that not classified as related to the Korean conflict?
I wish I knew.
You know, how long do you have before whoever makes the final decision on this kind of thing makes the final decision? How much more time do you have?
September, maybe into October because of the COVID delay on things like that, but next month.
Okay. And your impression is that the DPAA is on your side with this? They think your dad's name should be on that memorial.
Yes. He stated that he is within the Korean War theater time frame. But I did hear from my source in D.C. something about the zone. So that's why I put in my letter, wrong enemy, wrong zone. So having these guys, these brass boys, submitted to Navy casualty,
yeah,
is they're on my, they're doing it.
Well, good.
Whereas I'm already there. All the information's already at Navy casualty. And the gal there has been wonderful helping me. But this is probably going to go to the head of Navy casualty, and that's damn good backup.
It is, yeah.
I'm shocked, but overjoyed.
Well,
Like I said, this was a very busy week for me in terms of all this coming to a head and happening. So that's why
yeah,
I needed a little more time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you talking about all this. There's a question to kind of go back to the kind of the personal side of it. And before I answer the question, I mean, I know that it's a question that probably can't really be answered. The only people who could understand it are the people who experience what you've experienced. Um, Let me ask the question, and then I'll give you a really bad analogy, and we'll see if the analogy works. But it was obvious at the beginning of our discussion that, quite understandably, that your dad going missing when you're 14 months, I mean, this takes a big toll. And it's a toll that continues to be, it's a toll that continues to be taken. And the question is, is it possible to describe what that's like? So that's the question. I mean, what that toll is like. Let me give you an analogy that I think is a really awful analogy, but maybe it's helpful in some way. So there's something, and this is really Mickey Mouse compared to what you've dealt with. This is incredibly Mickey Mouse, but it's maybe a small analogy. That there's something that's been preoccupying me for some time. And it's not something I dwell on very much. It's something that I kind of try to push out of the center of my mind a lot, but it's always there. And it's just kind of always sapping a little bit of energy. It's always like a little knock on the door. It's just this thing that, even though it's not at the center of my thinking right now, it's just always there, kind of sapping energy, sapping time. There's always this slight knock on the door. Does that kind of get at it a little bit, that no matter what you're doing, you're carrying on in life? Of course, you're very involved in trying to find out what happened to your dad, but of course, you've got your life going on at the same time. But you're at the grocery store, you're in traffic, you're going from place to place. Is that kind of what it's like, that it's just always something that's there? It's always something that's always kind of a continual drain on your energy, on your emotional?
I'll
In
go
any
right
way,
into it. I can answer everything you have described.
yeah,
I think I told you earlier that I've always been a crybaby, and I tried to understand why I was a crybaby. I have this thing that happens to me whenever it comes up about my dad. See, it hits here, goes there, and the floodgates open. I'd go to a friend's house. They typically say, "What's your dad do? He died in a war," or "He's missing." I cry, and they never ask me again. People I've worked with in my nursing career, they know if it comes up. If I meet a guy coming in and he has a Navy hat on, I'm going to talk to this guy and share my story and bring it up, and I'm crying. They all know me as a crybaby. If you bring this up, I'm losing it. It has always been there, always. I used to write a lot of poetry, and I realized I'm finally going to put that together after, all these years of writing. And there's so many dark things related to my father, to God and country, and my father's sacrifice. See, you mentioned it. It hits me. The floodgates open. I have no control. The only things that holds me together at the meetings anymore in DC is I get angry. But anybody, anywhere on the street could mention it. I give my card to all these old, World War II hats and stuff like that, and I'll cry. I can't help it. So yes, it is a part of me. It's who I am. I have learned from an old friend of my mom, do not be ashamed of your tears. That was good to hear, because, I can't help it. I cry. It's who I am. It's, what do you say? It's who you are. And I know it's so related to that pain of the loss of a dad. As a kid growing up, your daddies were very curious creatures to me. Thank God the friends I hung out with all had really nice dads. I have very great images of dads. And
And it's not,
that's a good thing.
yeah, and it's not just that your dad wasn't there.
Dads are very curious to me.
Yeah. And it's not just that your dad,
For me, I didn't hear that.
yeah, it's not just that your dad wasn't there, but it's that there are big question marks as to what happened. I imagine that's a big part of it, right? There's, that word that gets used, closure. There's no, is that it? There's just, I'm sure you've heard that word a lot, but.
And I don't know what it means. They use that word and I am baffled by it. Like hoping I get a sense of that when I see their names on the wall. But I don't know. I'm not there yet. But I don't understand that word at all. A lot of the people I meet at the meetings are, this one wise woman once told me that when you lose your dad or your husband, that your world is turned upside down.